Imagine this. It's a chilly morning in London, 2007. The streets are quiet until a man bursts out of an apartment building wearing nothing but his underwear and sneakers. He's bleeding. He's screaming for help. And the first words out of his mouth will send shockwaves through Britain. Because according to him, the person who chained him up, the person who beat him, the person who just held him hostage, was one of the most famous celebrities in the country. A man everyone knew. A man everyone thought they understood. A pop icon named Boy George. Before we get deep into this case, I want to remind you, if you like hearing untold, raw, true crime stories that the mainstream media glosses over, go ahead and hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if something about this story shocks you, disturbs you, or makes you think, drop a comment. I want to hear your thoughts and feedback. Now, most people in the U.S. know Boy George for his massive hit with Culture Club, Karma Chameleon. Some might remember him from reality shows like The Voice or I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here. But in the 1980s, this man wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural revolution in eyeliner and top hats. He blurred gender lines with an androgynous style the world had never seen on a global stage. He was unapologetically himself in an era when being openly queer was not just controversial, it was dangerous. George, whose real name is George Allen O'Dowd, was born June 14, 1961, in Kent, England. He grew up in a big Irish family in southeast London, one of 6 kids. But life at home was far from peaceful. His father had a violent temper, especially toward George's mother, and all the kids grew up witnessing that abuse firsthand. For a young George, escape meant taking long walks by himself. He was obsessed with David Bowie, sometimes walking to Bowie's house just to look at it, imagining the life of a fearless artist. While his brothers were into cars, sports, and girls, George was into fashion, makeup, and music. That difference set him apart and made him a target for ridicule, but it also set the stage for his destiny. In 1981, at just 20 years old, he formed Culture Club. Within a year, they had a chart-topping hit, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? The band exploded in popularity, selling out shows across continents in a pre-internet world where crossing over internationally was no easy feat. Boy George's style, skirts paired with jackets, big hats, bold makeup, wasn't just about looking different. It was a statement. He became a visual icon for people who felt outside the norm. For many in the LGBTQ+ community, especially during the devastating AIDS crisis, seeing a famous man unapologetically defy gender expectations was empowering. But fame is a double-edged sword. Behind the sequins and hit songs, Boy George battled heroin addiction. He got sober in the late 80s but relapsed in the early 2000s, and by 2007 his life had taken a darker turn, one that would soon lead to headlines for all the wrong reasons. Enter Alden Carlson, a 29-year-old Norwegian male model living in London. Tall, attractive, confident. In January 2007, Boy George was scrolling through Gaydar, a popular dating and hookup site at the time, when he spotted Alden's profile. George messaged him up not for a date, but for a job offer. He wanted Alden to pose nude for a private photo shoot. The agreed rate, £400. Now, George dabbling in photography wasn't unusual. He'd tried his hand at fashion design, DJing, and other creative outlets. But asking a stranger from a dating site to strip down in your private apartment for a one-on-one session? That's already a setup that makes you pause. No studio? No other staff. Just a photographer and the model alone. A few weeks later, Alden showed up at George's East London flat for the shoot. And at first, things seemed fine. He stripped, George took photos, it was awkward but professional. That is, until George started doing lines of cocaine right there during the session. According to Alden, things escalated when he was sitting nude in a chair, and George suddenly put the camera down, walked over, and began performing oral sex on him without consent. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before Alden stopped him, saying, "No, that's not what I'm here for." Alden was clear. This wasn't an escort job. He wasn't there for sexual favors. He was there to pose for a professional photo shoot. George seemed a little put off by the rejection, but pretended to move on, resuming the shoot. But as the session wrapped up, the mood shifted again. George accused Alden of hacking into his laptop while he wasn't looking, stealing not only the nude photos they'd just taken, but other personal files. Alden denied it, but George refused to pay the full £400, giving him £300 instead. Given George's erratic, coked-up state, Alden decided not to argue. He left. For most people, that would have been the end of it. But in the weeks that followed, George began bombarding Alden with emails, some threatening, some flirtatious. 1 minute accusing him of theft, the next telling him he had a gem of an ass. Eventually, George offered him another paid photo shoot, and Alden, maybe wanting to smooth things over, maybe needing the money, said yes. Now I know what you're thinking. Why go back? The truth is, we don't know Alden's exact reasoning. Maybe he thought he could control the situation. Maybe he believed George had calmed down. Maybe the prospect of working with a famous figure in the gay scene still held some appeal. But whatever the reason, this second meeting would change his life forever. It was April 28, 2007, 3 months after their first encounter. Alden arrived at George's flat expecting a professional shoot. What he didn't know was that George had been stewing for months over his belief that Alden had hacked him. And this time, George had a plan. When Alden walked into Boy George's East London flat that spring afternoon, he had no idea he was walking into a trap. George had made sure of it. Before Alden even arrived, George had invited a friend over, someone who could serve as backup muscle. His plan wasn't about photography at all. It was about confrontation and control. The shoot began normally enough. Alden posed. George took pictures. But like before, George started racking up lines of cocaine mid-session. At some point, George stepped out, saying he needed to go to the store for milk. Instead, he met his friend in the hallway and brought him quietly into the apartment. When George called Alden into the bedroom, Alden stepped in naked, completely unprepared, and saw another man standing there. Before he could even ask what was happening, George and his friend rushed him. They tackled him onto the bed, hitting and kicking him while yelling profanities. The easygoing celebrity facade was gone. What Alden saw now was a man consumed by rage, paranoia, and drugs. George shouted accusations that Alden had hacked into his laptop, that he had stolen photos and files. Alden denied it, but George wasn't listening. Within moments, George grabbed a pair of metal handcuffs, yanked Alden's arm above his head, and locked him to a wall fixture. The friend's job seemed done at that point. He left the apartment, but George stayed, pacing, furious. For a while, George left the room, taking Alden's phone and laptop with him to search for evidence. He found nothing. No stolen images. No hacked files. Alden was innocent. But George didn't care. When he came back into the bedroom, George reportedly said, "Now you're going to get what you deserve." What happened next was a 30-minute nightmare. George attacked Alden using whatever he had at hand, chains, leather straps, even sex toys, whipping and striking him over and over. There was no sexual assault, but the violence was relentless. The only thing that saved Alden was the fact that the wall fixture wasn't as secure as George thought. Alden yanked and pulled until it broke loose from the wall, the cuffs still locked around his wrists. Seizing his chance, Alden ran for the front door. George chased him, swinging the chain, striking him as he struggled with the lock. Finally, Alden got the door open and bolted into the street, wearing only his underwear and sneakers, blood streaking down his arms and head. Passers-by stared. A shop owner nearby ushered him inside, locking the door behind him and calling the police. When officers arrived, Alden was still wearing the handcuff, his skin marked with red welts and cuts. They had to saw the cuff off at the station before taking his full statement. Alden told him everything, from the first meeting with George on Gaydar to the sexual advance he rejected, to weeks of harassment, and finally to the brutal attack. One detail Alden shared was personal and critical. He was HIV positive, something he claimed to have told George beforehand. That fact would later be twisted against him. When police questioned Boy George, he denied much of Alden's story. He admitted to handcuffing him, said he only did it to search his devices for stolen photos, but claimed he never beat him. And he denied any sexual contact, saying, "I'd never have slept with someone who was HIV positive." It was a shocking statement, especially coming from a gay celebrity who rose to fame during the AIDS crisis, a time when LGBTQ+ community fought tooth and nail against stigma and misinformation. But now, George was using that very stigma to try to discredit his accuser. The case went to trial in December 2008. Jurors were shown photographs of Alden's injuries, the clear marks of chain strikes and blunt force trauma. George's defense: he claimed the welts could have been a rash from HIV or marks from bondage gear used in the shoot. But the injuries were fresh, targeted, and consistent with being beaten, not an illness or playful kink. Alden testified that he believed the attack happened partly because George couldn't handle being sexually rejected. Whether it was drug-fueled paranoia or wounded pride, the jury was convinced. Boy George was found guilty of false imprisonment and assault. The judge called his actions callous and humiliating, sentencing him to 15 months in prison. At first, George was sent to Pentonville Prison, a notoriously tough facility. He later claimed he was attacked there in a homophobic assault, but he's also publicly said he had a great time in prison, contradicting himself in later interviews. He was eventually transferred to a more comfortable, lower-security facility in Suffolk, where conditions were far easier. After just 4 months, George was released early for good behavior, fitted with an ankle monitor and placed under curfew. It was over for him, legally at least. For Alden Carlson, it was anything but over. He has said the attack left him with lasting back injuries, a deep mistrust of people in intimate situations, and emotional trauma that only worsens when he sees George on television, still denying the violent parts of the crime. And now, with Boy George producing his own biopic, Alden fears the truth will be rewritten for the big screen. George has already said he wants his truth in the movie, not the court's version. That means millions of people could see a version of events shaped entirely by the man convicted of the crime, not the victim who lived through it. And that's why this story matters. Because fame has a way of erasing ugly truths, and when celebrities control the narrative, victims can be silenced all over again. If you made it this far into the story, thank you for listening. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think a convicted attacker should be allowed to rewrite the story in a movie about themselves? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget, if you found this video eye-opening, hit like, share it with someone who should know the truth, and subscribe so you never miss these deep-dive true crime cases. Because when the spotlight fades, the truth is all that's left.